manipulation, disrespect, dishonesty, control, humiliation, and ownership. Sexy. What's up, book nerds? I'm Lucky's Universe, and today we are going to be talking about bad boys. Yes, the fictional character profile that we adore, but should we? My childhood was dominated by YA bad boys, and at the time I didn't think too deeply on it, but now I am older and hopefully wiser, and I've started to see things a little differently. In this video, I'm going to talk about what a bad boy actually is and why we even like them in the first place, before going on to list some bad boys who make my heart melt and those who are sadly just bad. For clarification, by just bad, I mean fictional bad boys who were toxic and or abusive based on my own research and understanding of bad boys and what a toxic relationship is. First of all, let's get into what a bad boy actually is. An article by Dinah Cheney defines the term bad boy as a person of the male species who is hypermasculine, emotionally unavailable with high levels of testosterone, which is what leads to more rebellious or bold actions. They can also display characteristics of what is referred to as the dark triad. The dark triad is made up of 3 traits. Narcissism, which means the person is very into themselves or entitled. I'm unsure of the pronunciation of this word, but I say Machiavellian. Machiavellian basically just means that they act really callously and exploit others. And then there's psychopathy, which is a very broad term, but means that the person displays antisocial or impulsive behavior. A bad boy may contain all 3, 1, or none of these behaviors. Cheney then goes on to state the reasons why women are attracted to bad boys. If they're so bad and emotionally unavailable, like why would we want to date them in the first place, right? Technically, we don't want to date them. We want to do other explicit, naughty things to them, but we don't actually see them as long-term partners. This has something to do with the more animalistic, instinct-based part of our brain that's obsessed with mating and having babies. Our brain sees a bad boy and thinks, big, brave man who will give us strong offspring. But when our logical brains take over again, although bad boys still have a certain appeal, we tend to imagine our long-term partners as being more stable, more reliable, and just nicer. Bad boys also have this danger factor, like a sense of rebellion. As women, most of us have our rebellious characteristics stamped out at a young age because society wants us to be nice and smiley and amiable. Therefore, to us, bad boys seem exciting. If a woman has low self-esteem and confidence, she may also be attracted to someone with high self-esteem and confidence. And then there is the age-old argument of wanting something that we cannot have. By the pure scientific definition of a bad boy, it can be concluded that most YA fictional bad boys aren't actually true bad boys. Since most of them turn out to be the spiky on the outside, soft on the inside kind of character, or they're a dick to everyone except the story's protagonist. A real life bad boy wouldn't actually have this soft side, but for the purpose of this video, I'm gonna let that one point of the definition slide. Now I'm going to talk about what makes a toxic relationship so that you guys know what I'm basing my decisions about these fictional characters on. I'm not going to go into too much detail, but this is a trigger warning for anyone who might be uncomfortable with me discussing the nature of toxic or abusive relationships. The signs of a toxic or abusive relationship, aside from the element of physical abuse, are as follows. A lack of support. Conversations riddled with sarcasm, hostility, or no conversation at all. Jealousy towards a partner's success. Controlling behaviors like wanting to know where their partner is at all times, wanting to know who they're hanging out with, even going so far as to put like a tracker on their car or their phone, needing to be in constant communication. Holding grudges. Dishonesty, disrespect, and constant stress in their relationship. And losing relationships with friends and family. That's just a general overview, but now you know the kind of, I guess you would call it a rubric that I'm working off. Rubric. I've been in university too long. Our first fictional bad boy to meet his fate is, of course, Rhysand from the Court of Thorns and Roses series. If you haven't already seen my Court of Thorns and Roses review series, I will link it up here so you can get a more in-depth discussion of why I think Rhysand deserves to be skinned with a vegetable peeler and dipped in a bath of salt water. My main issue with Rhysand is in his treatment of the main protagonist, Feyre, while she is trapped in this place called Under the Mountain. Also, spoilers if you haven't read the books. Yeah. Feyre gets injured and is on the brink of death. Rhys appears and offers to heal her, but for a price. She must spend 1 week of the month with him every month for the rest of her life. This is already highly manipulative behavior. It's either agree to his deal or die. Once Feyre agrees to the deal, Rhysand dresses her in very revealing clothing every night, paints her body with tattoos so he can tell when people touch her, and also takes control of her mind and forces her to drink fairy wine, which blacks her out for the whole night, and then she realizes after that while she was blacked out, she was just dancing very provocatively, just being all over Rhysand, you know, very icky. And the next day she has no memory of the events. Rhysand does this every day for a month. Manipulation, disrespect, dishonesty, control, humiliation, and ownership. Sexy. And before all of the ACOTAR fans can go crazy in the comments defending Rhysand, saying that he was only doing those things to protect Feyre from the story's antagonist Amarantha, can't it be argued that any form of sexual harassment under any circumstances is unacceptable? Rhysand all but date raped Feyre, and she's supposed to, what, thank him? Oh wait, she does! And my favorite part of the whole thing is where Rhysand tries to justify himself by saying something to Feyre. It goes on the lines of, why do you think that I never touched you beyond the waist and the arms even though I wanted to? Like, dude, do you want a medal for not raping her? Would you like a sticker for displaying the barest shred of human decency? The series goes on to explain that all of this previous behavior was just a mask. And Rhysand was a good guy doing terrible things to protect his loved ones. Aw, cute. Even so, I feel that his behavior under the mountain was unacceptable and he deserved to face consequences for it. And no, his own self-hatred and regret doesn't count as a proper consequence. I believe that in the first book, Rhysand was straight up abusive to Feyre, like no question. There were plenty of ways he could have protected Feyre without doing what he did. I'm also of the opinion that Rhysand and Feyre's relationship was toxic. The main reason that Rhysand didn't face any consequences for his abusive behavior was because Feyre immediately forgave and forgot. My issue lies with their mating bond. I still cannot get behind the whole true love thing because I feel that in this context, the mating bond might be part of the reason why Feyre forgives Rhysand so easily. I can't trust her mindset. Like, does she forgive Rhysand because it's her choice? Or is there something in the mating bond that manipulates her to see Rhysand in a lighter image? Furthermore, when Feyre and Rhysand got together, Feyre had just emerged from a much more obviously abusive relationship with Tamlin. Rhysand takes her away from that situation and her poor brain just latches onto anything that's even a teensy bit better than her previous boyfriend. Sure, her brain says, Rhysand abused and manipulated you, but he's not Tamlin, so there you go. Feyre had been taken from her home by Tamlin and then she fell in love with him. Then Rhysand took her from her new home and she fell in love with him. If Rhysand recognized the pattern of an abuse victim or someone suffering from like Stockholm Syndrome, he chose to ignore it. So to summarize, in my opinion, Rhysand from A Court of Thorns and Roses is a fictional bad boy who is just bad. I do not think that his character should be romanticized or thirsted over, and I do not think that his and Feyre's relationship should be promoted as a healthy one. This is the hill I will die on. Let's move on. Next up, we have the granddaddy of all toxic bad boys, Edward Cullen from the Twilight Saga. Literally, the granddaddy. He's so old. I feel like this opinion is less controversial than the last one because most of us agree that Edward Cullen was not a good dude. Granddaddy vampire preying on teenage girl grossness aside, let's look at the ways in which Edward was abusive and or toxic. Edward shows his toxicity in a few different ways than Rhysand, but you'll notice that they both hide behind the excuse of wanting to keep their partners safe or protect them. Just hiding behind their good intentions, really. Edward is the definition of controlling. He always needed to know where Bella was, what she was doing, who she was with. Like, the dude watches her sleep. Like, come on. He was also extremely controlling when it came to Bella's friends. Sure, she could have friends, but only those that Edward approved of. Jacob Black, for instance, not okay. He even disabled Bella's car engine to prevent her from going to see Jacob, and then claimed that he was doing it because he didn't trust Jacob and wanted to protect Bella. Furthermore, Bella stopped seeing all of her friends once she started dating Edward. Granted, this wasn't necessarily at Edward's insistence, but he wasn't really telling her to go and spend time with her friends. Edward consistently lied to Bella, again under the pretense that he wanted to keep her safe. And the icing on the cake, Edward manipulated and pressured Bella into getting married. Bella wanted two things: to be a vampire and to get it on with Edward. Edward, after asking and being rejected multiple times, promises that they will get it on if she marries him. He also used the fact that Bella wanted Edward to be the one to transform her into a vampire as like a bargaining tool in one of their many arguments. Edward and Rhysand go about their abusive and toxic ways in different styles, but they have the same underlying reasons of wanting to keep their girlfriends safe and to protect them. And funnily enough, they're both portrayed as the most gentleman-like men with the highest respect for women. Edward and Bella have peak toxic relationship behavior as well. Part of the reason why Bella let Edward get away with most of his bullshit is because she suffered from extreme low self-esteem and felt ugly and worthless next to Edward, so she pretty much let him do whatever he wanted out of fear that he would find someone else and leave her. And like I said, Bella cut out all of her friends once she started dating Edward. When Edward broke up with Bella, she fell into a deep depression and then eventually slowly started to interact with her friends and family again. As soon as that happened, Edward reappeared and they went back to the exact same thing that they were doing before. And when Edward thought Bella had died, he attempted suicide. I love my tea with a dash of codependency. Sure, dating a vampire might be fun, but imagine having to give up your independence and freedom to do so. Unfortunately for my Twilight-obsessed 11-year-old self, I have labeled Edward as a bad boy who is just bad. And now we have probably one of the most contested is he good or is he bad boys, and that is Mr. Rochester from Jane Eyre. A lot of readers will stand behind Rochester as a great hero, tortured man, perfect bad boy. In my opinion, Mr. Rochester is, to put it frankly, a dick. Such a dick. Just the dickiest dick in Dickland. Then again, most fictional bad boys are, so what's the problem? For those of you who don't know the story of Jane Eyre, Jane is a plain but intelligent young woman who is employed as a governess in the house of the mysterious and brooding Mr. Rochester, and the two eventually fall in love. There's actually quite a large age gap between them. Jane is a lot younger than Mr. Rochester, but we kind of put that aside because in those days, it was actually pretty common to marry someone who was like a lot older or a lot younger than you, so I'm not too fussed on that point. But what readers eventually learn is that Mr. Rochester has a wife. His wife suffers from some sort of unexplained mental illness, and it's progressed to the point where she's become a danger to herself and to others, so Rochester keeps her locked away in a secret room in his house, and only very few people know about it. Whenever Jane hears like noises or shouts and brings it up with him, he quickly explains it away. Rochester's wife basically just chills in this room all on her own, and she's never allowed to leave. It's not until the day that Jane and Rochester are getting married that Jane actually learns of his wife's existence, and Rochester swears that he was going to tell her a year and a day after they got married. What? Like, dude, you locked up your wife and lied about it to your girlfriend. How romantic? Rochester enthusiasts would argue that at the time that Jane Eyre was written, being committed to a mental institution or an asylum would be far worse than being locked up in a room, so Mr. Rochester was just choosing the lesser of two evils. Which, valid point, but Rochester doesn't really fall back on this excuse that much in the book. He mostly just adopts the bitch crazy attitude and leaves it at that, and for that reason, I can't really trust his choices. Next, Mr. Rochester pretends to have feelings for another woman, Miss Ingram, in order to make Jane jealous. This really hurts Jane's feelings. Even though this is a trick that is replayed in almost every teen romance, fictional or in fiction or reality, it's still highly manipulative behavior. And Mr. Rochester specifically stated he wanted to make Jane jealous. He wanted to make the woman that he loved feel bad. That's iffy. So, is Mr. Rochester a bad boy who is just bad? Honestly, I'm a little bit on the fence. But more so leaning towards, yeah, he's not a very nice guy and Jane deserved better. So talking about bad boys is making me equal parts sad and angry, so let's talk about something that makes my life worth living: good bad boys. First on the list is my first hardcore fictional crush, and that is Adrian Ivashkov from the Vampire Academy. Adrian isn't the main love interest of this YA supernatural romance, but he is a romantic interest for a decent part of the book, and in my opinion, a way better option than the guy that the protagonist actually ended up with. Adrian is a vampire who is a bad boy because of his bad habits. I'm talking drinking, smoking, gambling, and girls. Then along comes Rose, our protagonist, and Adrian is infatuated, but surprise, surprise, Rose isn't really that comfortable with all the gambling and the girls and the smoking and the drinking. And she says if they're going to date, there needs to be some rules and he needs to respect her boundaries. And he does. Wait. A bad boy who respects boundaries. What is happening to the world? Rose wants him to give up cigarettes. He tries his hardest to quit. Rose wants monogamy. Adrian, be loyal. He expresses his concerns about keeping Rose safe, but ultimately accepts that her job is dangerous, and he's okay with that. Rose is uncomfortable about having sex. Adrian lets her take her time. Throughout the series, Adrian learns to communicate his feelings to Rose in a healthy manner. Adrian does the most for Rose, and Rose, I don't really want to talk about Rose. Adrian deserved better, and I'm not going to say that their relationship was entirely healthy because Rose was lying to herself about being in love with this other guy, and Adrian was lying to himself about Rose being in love with that other guy. But as far as bad boys go, Adrian was it for me. There was no abuse involved, no unwanted watching of the sleep, and what I enjoyed most was that Adrian kind of let Rose do her own thing. He was never over the top like, I am the #1 feminist, you have choices, do what you want. This whole video is turning into a Rhysand hate train, I'm sorry. He was supportive of Rose and her dangerous occupation, but also felt comfortable expressing his concerns whenever he was unhappy with a decision that she made or wanted her to be more careful. However, he never expected her to stop doing something just because he said so. Now that my elongated gush about Adrian is over, we're going to go back in time to the classic romance of all classic romances and its resident bad boy, Mr. Darcy from Pride and Prejudice. Mr. Darcy fits the criteria for a bad boy quite nicely. Emotionally unavailable, antisocial, entitled. Those of you who don't know the story, Pride and Prejudice is about a woman named Elizabeth Bennet who engages in a complex will they won't they back and forth relationship with the brooding and mysterious Mr. Darcy. I feel like that's the qualifier for any male love interest wanting to be in a classic romance. You must be mysterious and you must be brooding. You must also be ridiculously wealthy. The thing about Mr. Darcy is that he's cold and callous, but he's not actually mean. I don't know about you guys, but when a fictional bad boy is just straight up cruel, it's kind of a turnoff. Mr. Darcy doesn't go out of his way to insult or make Elizabeth feel bad. When he offends her, it's usually due to his inability to understand human emotions, or he's just so swept off his feet by Elizabeth that he can't think properly. Darcy is a respectful boy. He does not play games with Elizabeth's affections or try to make her jealous or make her feel bad or seek credit for the things that he does for her. In the beginning, when he broke up Elizabeth's sister Jane and his friend Mr. Bingley, because he thought that Jane was just after Mr. Bingley's money, he acknowledges that he was wrong and he apologizes for that. When Elizabeth rejects his first proposal, he respects that and gives her space. He doesn't pursue her or write her constantly or follow her around. He takes no for an answer. Revolutionary. When Elizabeth and Darcy meet at some point again and Elizabeth confuses Darcy's sister to be his new girlfriend, Darcy doesn't let her stew in upset or jealousy for any amount of time, as at the earliest convenience he lets her know that that is his sister, not his girlfriend. That's why I have more respect for Mr. Darcy than I do for Mr. Rochester, because Darcy doesn't want Elizabeth to feel bad. I also liked that Mr. Darcy didn't interfere with Elizabeth's relationship with Mr. Wickham. Those who have read the story will know that Mr. Wickham is actually kind of a gold digger who messed with Darcy's sister. And Elizabeth believed all of Mr. Wickham's lies, but Mr. Darcy didn't say anything because he wanted to let Elizabeth come to her own conclusions and figure it out by herself. Eventually though, he does tell her the truth about Mr. Wickham in a letter and even helps out her family when Mr. Wickham forces them to pay a dowry that they can't afford. And Darcy doesn't straight away go to Elizabeth like, look what I did for you, do you love me now? Darcy is just a #1 bad boy in my books because he doesn't try and manipulate the girl into liking him or force her to do anything that she doesn't want to do. He'd be rude and brooding, but he'd also be respectful AF. In conclusion, there's more to being a good bad boy than being a dick. And there is a fine line between writing a good bad boy and writing an abusive and toxic douchebag. I do think, especially in this day and age, there is a huge problem in the book community about romanticizing these toxic or abusive characters and making those kinds of traits seem appealing. But most of it, I believe, isn't intentional. We've just been kind of brainwashed and desensitized towards those types of characters. I really feel like we need to try and normalize healthy character relationships, ones that aren't fraught with jealousy and manipulation and mild psychopathic behavior. Writing someone who starts off sadistic but then changes throughout the novel is great, it's fine, as long as their sadistic behavior has consequences and it isn't romanticized. I think that's where my main concern with Rhysand lies, because yes, he's toxic and abusive and then changes his ways, but when he was abusive, it was written like it was meant to be sexy. Like, Feyre was low-key turned on by all the weird shit that he did, and I don't know how I feel about that, especially knowing that the age of people who read those books is pretty young. That brings us to the end of what makes bad boys good, and I hope you found this video informative. If you agree with my opinion, leave a comment. If you disagree with my opinion, leave a comment. Just remember that on this channel, we promote debate, not hate. If you don't already follow me on TikTok, go check that out. I post some pretty cool stuff on there. I will also leave a link to my Twitter and my Goodreads down below. Thanks for listening, and I'll catch you later.